can. So we're going to start with, because I'm like really hilarious. What's brown and sticky? This is a joke in case you're wondering. So let me know in the chat. What's brown and sticky? Oh, Denise, maybe. You're not supposed to start with the answer to the joke. I should have said, okay, put on your 6-year-old hat and answer this joke. Yes, you're all very clever. It is a stick. Oh, dirty. Thanks, Anne. Thanks for playing along, dirty boogers. That's the way we go. Lindsay's son says glue. Thanks. That is as funny as I get the whole time. That's my one and only joke that I remember on a regular basis. So like Shannon said, I've been working outside with people of all ages for over 20 years now. And I started off as an environmental educator, and I would probably still put myself into that category as well. But I did pivot my work about 7 years ago to really focus on play. When I did environmental education programs, we learned a lot about trees and aquatic inverts, which is so valuable. But when I look back now, a big thing that was missing was play. We led children on hikes through the woods, and we stayed on the trail, and we didn't pick the flowers. But when I also look back at some of the more meaningful experiences the children had, especially, I'm sure you've all played the animal game before, that is what children remember. They might not remember the names of the 5 trees that we taught them, but they remembered that time they got to run around in the woods chasing each other. And so that idea of play became central to how I think about how we work, especially with young children in the natural world. And we'll talk about that. So currently I work with schools and communities and early childhood settings as well to ensure that children have more access to outdoor play experiences. I also work for a program called Timbernook, and I work with children outside in a space, and programs are usually about 3 hours. That's where I was today, so my cheeks are a little red, my hair is a little disheveled, but it's because I was outside with children. So what are we going to get to today? We have an hour and a quarter, not that long. It's now an hour. And so I'm hoping you can come away with today with a new, maybe a new idea that you hadn't thought about before, maybe a new loose part that you want to bring into your play space, or maybe a new way to talk about outdoor play with your colleagues, your neighbors, whatever that is for you. And so the outline for today, we're going to talk a little bit about what is play, maybe a little bit. Why outdoor play? The role of adults, like what's our role as adults in this? If this is child-led play, what do we do? And then I'm going to talk about loose parts ideas as well as other ways to look at outdoor play. And so I am, like Shannon mentioned, talking about what Sask Outdoors thinks about as play. That idea that it is child-led. It is not activities. You might provoke the children with a provocation or spark their curiosity in a certain way, but it's definitely child-led. That's what play is in my world. And it was interesting, I've always used the word unstructured, and you were using that too, Shannon. And then I was talking to Pierre, who is an amazing play advocate with the IPA, and he's stopped using the word unstructured because he's like, play, it's structured by children. So it's still very, very valuable. And so he's stopped using the word unstructured because it makes it sound like it's just like mayhem. But he's like, no, it's structured by children. And I thought that was a really important distinction between what we might think of as an activity and what we think of as play, that it is structured by children, not adults. Right, so I'm gonna start many of us might work with children, have children, but I'm just going to show a bunch of pictures. I'm not going to talk through them. I'm just going to show them. And as I click through them, I want you to think about how do they make you feel? And what are you seeing in these photos? And I'll ask you to share that in the chat in just a moment. All right, so let us know in the chat, what did you see in these pictures and how did they make you feel? Just a couple words would be great. Freedom, curiosity, curious, imagination, fun, exploring, engaging, having a blast. Miss seeing people in real life. Yes, wonder. Yeah, all those things. Play is all those things. Connection, that's a really important one too. And yeah, we have all, like, play is all these things. It also can be very challenging. It can be risky. All those things are what encompasses play. And it's really important to remember what play looks and feels like. Quite often we get caught up in the no's and don'ts and can'ts around outdoor play. And that's sort of when we get stuck in our head. But when we remember our heart and we can really see what children are doing outside, I think that's when we're inspired as adults, to remember that all these things are why we want to advocate for and promote outdoor play. So let's talk about, there's lots of reasons for outdoor play and getting outdoors. You're all here, so you're most likely the converted already. And you're already working with children, you probably already get these benefits of why we need to go outside. I'm just going to quickly talk about my 4 reasons. So on that resource page, there is a link to a page on my website that just sort of summarizes these 4 reasons. And I find it a really nice way to talk about why we need to get outside. So it's a great handout for parents, put on bulletin boards, that sort of thing. So our first one is about nature connection. Experiencing the environment with all our senses builds the foundation of nature connection that leads to lifelong environmental stewardship. And so the research has shown that children who have outdoor play experiences as children and have often an adult to share in the wonder and curiosity with them turn out to be adults who have a strong environmental ethic. So these adults are the people who might take them on adventures, that don't get squeamish when the worm is brought to you. But it's that modeling piece that we all know is so important for children. And the other way I like to think about nature connection in children is that children develop relationships through play. And so we need to allow them to play in and with the natural world. They need to be able to roll down the hills. They need to be able to balance on the logs and climb the trees and occasionally pick the flowers, and they might burn an ant or two. But these are the way that they develop a relationship, through play. And so we need to allow children to play with the natural world. We always must stay on the trail and we can't touch. It separates us and it separates children from the natural world, and they don't see it as being a part of them. And so I think having these direct experiences is the only way to develop that nature connection. It can't be done by bringing things inside. We actually have to go outside and touch and feel and smell and roll around in it. So that's nature connection, is one reason to get outside. The second one is about community connection and sense of place. Exploring our neighborhood helps children develop a sense of place and contributes to them feeling part of a safe and welcoming community. This can't be done inside. You have to get out, whether it's around your school, whether it's around your childcare center or in your own neighborhood. Getting out in your community is so important. And that's when you meet the senior across the street who gardens in her front yard. We have a woman across the street, great garden in the front. She's also started to put out toys that her grandkids are done with, just at the sidewalk, so you can walk over and play with them at any time you want. Or the little free library movement with books all over the place. So if you don't feel part of a safe and welcoming community, you're not going to let your kids outside to play. When they're old enough to go out on their own, you're also not going to allow that to happen. And so we need to children need to feel it, and we as adults need to feel it as well. And there's lots of other issues we could get into around not everyone has a safe community to be in outside. But it is one reason to get outside, is to develop that sense of place and belonging. The third one, and Shannon talked about this, how children are just more active outside. They're, like you said, one of the research studies showed that children were twice as active. They didn't do anything special to the outdoor space. They took the children from the inside to the outside, and their physical activity doubled. It's not difficult. And it totally makes sense. So children can move differently outside. Inside, there's lots of rules, like, I don't know, often you have to be more quiet. You can't run around. You can't climb the bookcases. You can't, there's so many can'ts and won'ts when it comes to how we can move our physical body in indoor spaces, unless you have access to a gym. The only place where children can kind of be themselves and use big movements and all of that is outside. And some children, not especially, but the four walls are very, very difficult and challenging for them. And when they're outside, they're completely different children. And a lot of that, I believe, is because they're allowed to be physically who they need to be. So getting outside is so good for children's physical activity and physical literacy. And it's also really great for our mental health. There's connections now between the chemicals that evergreen trees release into the air, calm our nervous systems. So they're making all these fascinating connections now that we probably all knew, but when science figures it out, it's now becomes official. But yeah, there's all these really interesting connections between our physical and mental health and getting outside. So that's reason number 3. And reason number 4, if you follow an emergent curriculum in the early years or inquiry-based learning in school age, natural curiosity is easily sparked outside. Something different is always happening. Here in Calgary, it's +10 today, and tomorrow it's going to be -15. Imagine the questions and the exploration and all that could come out of just observing what's happening outdoors. When the ladybugs start to come out in the springtime, that opens up a whole bunch of opportunities for questions and wonderings and all that. So the outdoors is a really fabulous place to spark curiosity and wonder. And in my opinion, it's the best place for learning. So those are my 4 reasons why we need to get outside. The list could go on. And I haven't come across any research that says it's horrible. There's no research that says do not take children outside. It is a terrible idea. Maybe there is some, but I haven't been able to find it. I'm actually I know the research is important, but I think now we need to move to actually doing it. We know it's good for children. We know they need more of it. Now, how do we actually do it? Yeah. So I'm going to turn it back to you. And I want you to think about those 4 reasons that I just talked about. And which one, and I know they're all connected, but you're going to have to choose one. Which one rises to the top for you? When you want to finish the sentence, I need to get children outside because, is it about nature connection? Is it about a community sense of belonging? Is it about physical health and well-being? Is it about curiosity and wonder? Which one for you kind of rises to the top? What would be your why? Let us know in the chat, what would your why be? So take a moment to think about that. We're covering them all here. Curiosity and wonder, physical health and well-being, nature connection, curiosity and nature. Sneaky Shauna putting 2 in. Health and well-being. Yes. Yeah, like I said, they're all connected. We can't do one without the other, but they're all essential. But you know what? sometimes getting children outside is hard. And to remember your why is sometimes really important when maybe you have 10, 20 children that you need to get dressed to go outside if you're a teacher, or your back really hurts, or it's cold and you forgot your long underwear. Sometimes it's really hard to get outside with children, but remembering your why might be able to get you over that hump and actually really work on getting the children outside when it does, and when it's not easy. And right now we're in winter, and although winter is fabulous, it can be more challenging. All right. So before we move on to the role of us as adults, does anyone have any questions or comments that they'd like to share? Okay. All right. So what's our role as adults? So we want to support child-led play. And we do have a role as adults. We have a really important role as adults. We are often the gatekeepers, right? We say yes or no to going outside, sort of where and what children are allowed to do. So we have a big role in this. And one way to think about our role is to think about, I can't remember if I have 4 or 5 because I've added one recently, but I'll go through them and talk briefly about them. The first one, our role is to provide children time outside. Is this easy? Not always. It can be really hard. When we think about the amount of time that children need to really get into play, they need more than, what's your typical recess these days? Like half an hour, maybe, not even, like 15 minutes recess. I know at my daughter's school, they eat lunch and they maybe get 20 minutes to play, and then they're back in the classroom again. If you're looking at a childcare center, we have to eat, we have to nap, we have to do, I don't know, circle, whatever the schedule is. Our children are scheduled and scheduled and scheduled. And so finding hours, it's not half an hour, it's not an hour, it's 2-3 hours where they can get into play. And so that's the amount of time that children need. And if you watch children play, there's often a similar pattern. So the first 10 minutes, some children jump right into it, but others, they don't know what to do. They're kind of wandering around. It takes them a while to figure out what to do. And quite often, sometimes after that first 10 minutes, then they might find something they want to do, but there might be a little bit of conflict with the other children in the space because they all want to play with maybe something. And so that's when there's conflict. And quite often that's when adults step in and kind of shut it down. Like, if you can't solve this, we're done. When really you got to let them work through that, and then they can get in, then they get into that play. So it isn't till about 40 minutes in that children get into play. And the children I was working with today, they're 6 to 10 years old. And for the first hour, me and my staff, my colleague, we were like, what are they doing? They're like, they're just wandering around. They kept like having these weird little stick fights, which was fine, but they was like, they're not doing anything. They're just sort of wandering around. It took them a good hour to wander around the space, to kind of like sense each other out a little bit. And then they got into it. They built a hamburger stand, they built a pirate ship, all these things started to happen, but it took them a good hour to get there. And so time is so important. How can we find more time for children to play? So that's one of our roles as adults. Our next role is to provide them with a space. Children need a variety of different spaces to play with and play in. They need, sometimes we just have a field, and we'll talk more about what sort of we've decided is good play space, but having a variety of environments to play in, forests, creeks, even an urban environment. There's so many possibilities in an urban environment. So they need space, and they need safe places where they are welcome to play. So much of our world, children aren't really allowed to be fully children. And so what are those spaces that they feel safe and welcome to play in? Children need materials to play with, whether that's going to the forest and just using the natural loose parts we find there, or is it us as adults providing different loose parts for them to engage in? And we'll talk a bunch of about loose parts. But that's one of our roles as well, is provide them with those materials to play with. Another one of our roles, which might be one of the more challenging ones, is the idea of permission. Children need permission from us to do all sorts of things. And so that's where that idea of risky play comes in. What do we say no to? What are we saying yes to? Why are we saying no to that? So that idea of permission. There was a really great, I don't know if you've shared it on the social media, Shannon, the Child and Nature Alliance did a really good what to say instead of be careful out there. So what do you say instead of be careful when children are doing something that might make you feel a little uncomfortable? This one is really, really challenging, this permission piece. And it's one I'm constantly working through. Yeah, so what's our level of comfort, and where do we start, and how does that impact children's play? Oh yeah, to do with permission, I just wanted to show a couple of tree pictures. So this is my child way up there, and it's different with some of you might have your own children, and you allow them to do things that the children that you work with, you wouldn't allow them to do, because it's a different duty of care, right? I know my child really well. I know her competence and confidence at climbing, although this did make me little woozy. It wasn't great, but I knew she was confident and competent to do this. Yeah, there was lots going on there. But anyway, when there's different levels here when you're working with children or with your own children that you know really, really well. This is from where I work, and these are two different, again, tree situations, which are the one on the left, little guy with yellow pants. He was new to the program. I didn't know him. I didn't know what he could do. So I was really extra close there, asking him how he was doing, if he had done this sort of thing before. He's ended up being fine. And this other girl on the right, she always gets her, on the left, sorry, she always gets herself in places that she can't get down from. And there was a frozen ground. It was hard. If she fell, it would have been it wouldn't have been good. So we did take her down from that, because also she couldn't get down. But this isn't the only time she's kind of put herself in a place that she can't get down from. So just knowing the children that you work with really well, and knowing how close you need to be, and how you can support them to do this explorations with their bodies that they need to do. So that's a little bit around permissions. And this is one I've just added. Our other role as adults is to be advocates for outdoor play. How can we ensure that children have the time, space, and materials and permissions to play? We know children aren't getting the amount of outdoor play that, say, they used to when perhaps we were children. And so what's our role in that? What can we do in our professional lives to advocate for outdoor play? No matter what field you work in, whether you're a teacher or a physiotherapist or an early childhood educator, you have a role in advocating and supporting outdoor play. Or whether you just want to do it in your own community, because there's a huge role for us to get to know our neighbors and allow children to be seen and playing outside. So we have a role as adults to advocate for this. It sounds like Sask Outdoors is starting to go down that route as well. So maybe you'd like to join them. So that's our role as adults. I'm just going to ask you to reflect on which one of these do you think would be hard for you, is hardest for you? Is it hard for you to find time for the children that you work with? Is it hard to find adequate spaces to play in? Are materials hard to come by? Is it about permission for you? Or is it challenging to be that advocate? So which one of these would be hard for you to do? Time. I see a theme. That's, yeah, this is a new thing I've started to add in. And you know what? You're not the only ones who have trouble with time. Permission and trying to get the rest of the staff on board. Yeah, Ali, that's very challenging. Yeah. I mean, time, like we do have lots going on in our lives, in sort of our personal lives, but also in a structured school or childcare setting. There's a lot. There's a lot of schedules. There's a lot of things that need to get done. And so maybe rethinking how we schedule things to find those little, to give children just a little bit more time outside. And Ali, I have no magic bullet for getting your staff on board. It can be challenging, and it's not something that happens right away. It's sort of a long-term culture change often. There's a wider culture change, and then there's culture changes within schools that can happen, but those things don't happen overnight at all. But it is possible. So thanks for sharing that. So as adults, these are the things we need to keep in mind. We need to find children time, space, materials, permission, and we need to advocate and find ways to support outdoor play. Does anyone have any questions or comments that they would like to add before we move on? Ali says, so one of her challenges is moving from running my own day home to switching to a center. Oh yeah. So you're in the day home, it's only you, and now you have all your colleagues to work with. I don't envy you that task. And I mean, the cultures of childcare centers can be challenging. It's important to know that how does your director feel about it? And because I mean, a lot of the direction comes from that. Looks like you can connect with Denise on this. Great. Anyone have any other challenges or questions they want to add? Okay. And if you do want to exchange emails, Ali and Denise, you can use a private message function in the chat if you'd like to do that. Get that. So I do also like to add in a bit of a reality check, and it has to do with a little bit of what you have already mentioned. When we look at the spaces that we have to work with, so if you work in a school setting, this is the school, one of the schools in my community. I'm sure Saskatchewan has very similar situations. We've decided that a school is a large building surrounded by a tarmac thing and a big field with a metal and plastic playground plunked down in the corner. This school is lucky. They have an outdoor learning garden at the front, but it's more for teachers to use with their students for some more structured activities. But this is what we decided that is a good outdoor space for children. This is one of the schools. This is a junior high. Junior high kids need to play too, but it's, again, same thing. We've like this design of outdoor spaces for schools has barely changed since schools have been starting to be built. So these are trees around the outside, big space in the middle. This one looks a little better, hey? So this isn't a school. A friend of mine sent this to me. He took an aerial Google shot of a prison. So, I mean, look at these are pretty good outdoor spaces, like tons of green space. And they've got some great trees over here, maybe some gardens out back. Like this is amazing. And yes, they deserve it too. And our children deserve better outdoor spaces. So just a little contrast there. Yes, Amanda, I hear you. Don't blame the designers, blame the budget and administrators who control that. So true. Yeah, so much money goes into the building that basically the outdoors has to be funded by your parent council, by grant money. And even then you're controlled by what the school board says you can and can't do. It's not easy at all. Some schools have made movement on it, but Um, we could do so much more. I mean, and some schools have this amazing situation where they're in an older community surrounded by really amazing nearby nature. This is along the Elbow River, so they have like amazing access here. It really depends from school to school what's possible for outdoor access. But even I know schools who live within like walking distance from amazing parks who never ever use them. So I don't know if this is used or not. And then we move to our childcare settings. This is on the second floor of an office tower. They tried to grow one plant and it died. They have plastic, metal, and rubber. And this is what we think is appropriate for young children to have. This is their play space every single day. There's no nature here. And this is a licensed facility. This one's a little better. This is an amazing childcare program. The educators are phenomenal. They were really trying to do more outdoor play, working with what they have. They at least have a small patch of grass around outside. Same program. And often what we do is we take a space and we plunk a climber down in the middle and say, we're done. This climber they should just take it out. But imagine opening that space up by just taking that climber out and bringing in loose parts, for example. So our childcare spaces aren't much better. This is the next one. This is a licensed facility in my city. It's a strip mall. It's basically the drainage ditch behind the strip mall is their outdoor space. So it's south facing, so it gets so hot. I can't even imagine them using this in the middle of August. The grass was all dead. I can't imagine. Mosquitoes are probably nasty in there in the early spring, in the early summer. Anyway, this is inappropriate. This should not be the outdoor space that the only outdoor space that these young children have access to every day. So I like to add in a bit of reality check because this is often what children have access to. I'm hoping that you have access to better spaces, but the spaces out there that we're working with it needs a lot of work. Maybe we shouldn't have childcare centers in strip malls. Did I have an opinion? Yes. All right. So let's move on to how we might support outdoor play. So we're going to talk about loose parts. I love loose parts. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with them. So loose parts are open-ended materials. So these are materials like a stick is a loose part. There's lots. It can be a bat, it can be a sword, it can be a magic wand, it can be all those things. So they're open-ended materials. You might call them quite often junk, but they are really amazing at sparking children's imagination and curiosity. And bonus, they're often free or very inexpensive. And so we spend tens of thousands of dollars on stationary playgrounds. If we could just divert some of that money to, I don't know, play workers and loose parts, I think we could do amazing for play. Anyway, I'm going to go through some ideas around loose parts because I mean, the opportunities are endless. And so we could go on and on and on. In the resource that I shared earlier, there's a link to, I'd put together a loose parts guide and just has 5 materials to start with. And I'm going to go through those and add some more at the end. So here's some materials that really spark curiosity and learning with children. And these ones are mostly sort of manufactured, not necessarily natural loose parts. So one of the easiest ones is kitchen stuff. I try not to use the word mud kitchen all the time because, you know, mud isn't always possible or desired, depending if you have, I don't know, 15 toddlers that get covered from head to toe in mud. That might not be really awesome. And it might not be a great starting point for someone. So a nature kitchen is another way to phrase it. So it's not so scary, but really it's bringing out the kitchen things. So it's real stuff. It's not the plastic crap that we play with. It's like real pots and pans and bowls and spoons and all these really real materials that children love to play with. So yes, sometimes it ends up being a mud kitchen, and sometimes bringing the stuff out in the winter and having colored ice that they can play with. And it doesn't have to be fancy. You can buy a mud kitchen from Scholar's Choice for like $1,500 if you want. If you have someone a parent who's willing to, or a grandparent that's willing to build a fancy one for you, that's great. All you need is a surface to work on. We often use spools as the surface, or a board between two stumps. You need a surface big enough for children, 3 or 4 children to play, and for some materials on that sort of counter space. And that's all you need. You don't need a fancy mud kitchen. In fact, when you build a fancy mud kitchen, it becomes very stationary, and that limits the play as well. If you can have something that you can move around, so a friend of mine made the really good point that we often put mud kitchens in the corner of our play spaces, whereas she would pull it out to the middle, and it changes the whole dynamic on how children play with it. It becomes a very social thing as opposed to having it off in the corner. Anyway, so the most important thing is to have the kitchen stuff. The surface and the hooks that you put things on doesn't really matter. It's to have the real stuff for children to explore. And so with younger children, there's a lot of pouring back and forth. There's a lot of mixing. So those are all foundational science and math skills going on in there. That's about volume, all sorts of really great things going on when we bring out the kitchen stuff. Oh, that's a good idea, Leah. Leah says add flagging tape so you don't lose the white kitchen stuff in the snow. Are you speaking from experience, Leah? The next great thing to have around are buckets and baskets. Children, like loose parts, one of the ideas behind it is that children can build their own play spaces, and so they need some way to move things around. And so buckets and baskets are fabulous opportunities for that. Baskets, the world has an overabundance of baskets. Like thrift stores are drowning in baskets. Every time I go into our local Value Village, it's like there's so many baskets, and they're beautiful. They're often made of natural materials. I mean, I do have opinions on sturdy baskets, but baskets are really great. Children love filling them up with things and carrying it around. And yeah, this baby was amazing, Lacey. Like, it was a public event, and he or she was just like covered in mud, so happy with herself. But buckets are also used for things like sturdy 5-gallon pails are great for, you can turn them upside down and you can sit on them, you can stand on them. You can, in the winter, they're great for shoveling snow. These buckets, we have an awesome little creek that goes through our play space, and the children use them as dams sometimes and watch the water flow around them. So buckets and baskets. One little guy took a basket and he put it over his head with the basket part on the back, and he was into Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and the whole time he was a turtle. So that basket turned into his turtle shell. So really they're fabulous. You can get buckets left over at restaurants. So this one in the top right is from Tim Hortons. It was full of chocolate fondant, if you can believe it. So quite often you can find these things on Kijiji or Marketplace. People give them away, or usually they're trying to sell them for a little extra cash. So buckets and baskets. Tarps and sheets are really fabulous for all sorts of things. Of course, building shelters and tents and all those types of things are perfect. Sometimes the younger children need extra help with sort of attaching and making that work. But they're great for that. This picture in the middle is burlap, and we tied it up between two two trees or two trees, and the children started to decorate it. We didn't, and this was totally out of the blue that they started to do this. They took little flowers and little branches and they stuck it through the spaces in the burlap. So it was a really cool use of that. Even it's just, and these shelters don't have to be fancy. This one on the lower right, it's just a rope that between two trees, and we attached the tarp to it and put bricks on the bottom to hold it out like a little tent. And often that's enough for the children to kind of feel that sense of enclosure and having their own little space. Using sort of sheets. In the middle here, we have some old curtains, and you just put them over a space and it suddenly creates a little bit of curiosity and intrigue of what's behind there. So that's another way to use them. And painting on them is great outside. So putting out a bucket of mud or paints, painting on sheets or shower curtains outside is really useful too. And again, the thrift stores are just full of sheets. Wheels and sleds, again, to move things and people around a play space. There's all sorts of different ways you can do this. The sort of hand cart thing, I've seen, this was actually at a daycare, they had one of these. I'm like, what a great idea. So the children were moving each other around on it. One would stand and the others would push them around. They can also use it to move heavier things. So if you have stumps in your play space, they might use those to move the stumps when they can't actually lift them that well. Sleds are really great in winter, and they can work in summer as well for moving things around. Wheelbarrows, we have a little kid-sized wheelbarrow. And I mean, there was this one little guy who just basically for 3 hours would push it around because he really liked that heavy work of driving something around. He'd put his lunch kit in there, drive it around. So wheelbarrows are really, really fun. And just tires of various kinds are really useful to have. Children roll them around. You can put two of them out and put a board on, and suddenly you have a surface to play on. All sorts of things you can do with tires. So these are great things to have in your outdoor space. Boards are another super easy thing to have. And they come from, I don't know, the fence project someone did, or a construction site, or probably Rona and Home Depot, they have cuts that they might be able to give you as well. So boards, again, open up so many opportunities. They're balance beams, they're teeter-totters. The bottom left corner here is a little ramp that someone put together. So simple. But what was beauty about it, and what really showed what loose parts can do, is a little like new 18-month-old girl came up to this and she walked up one side and then down the other. And then a 4-year-old came by on her bike and did the same thing. So same material, different ages can use it in different ways depending on where they are at and what they can do with it. So boards are really, really simple materials. If you're okay with hammers and nails, letting children use hammers and nails is a really great activity as well. The top right corner here, this was hammers and nails, but this group of children who had never met before spent an hour or so together building this. I think it had to do with rescuing deer. I'm not quite sure. It was quite elaborate. Not sturdy, but they got to use hammers and nails and rope and all sorts of interesting things to build this together. So those are great things. Other loose parts, the classic, the box, all sorts of great things to do with boxes. You can make them look like a box, but they're also great for sliding down hills if you don't have toboggans. I've seen one little guy, he got in there and he really needed to feel that sense of being enclosed, and he kind of collapsed the box and rolled around in it. So boxes are always great in summer and winter. Winter, they don't last as long because they get wet and soggy, but still valuable. Clay is a really fun material to have outside. doesn't work in winter because it freezes, but not Play-Doh and not plasticine, but actual real clay. We made faces for trees. So it might be a little like community project. You leave little tree faces around, and it's natural, so it just eventually falls apart. Ooh, large inner tubes are awesome, Ken. I've never played with those outside with a group, but that would be awesome. And here's just a variety of different, again, tubes, cardboard tubes. This one that's making the V shape, that's the padding from barbecue packaging, so Canadian Tire, that sort of thing. Weeping tile is this black tube at the back. So those things are always great to have around. And when we look at winter, I mean, the natural loose parts we have out there for winter, ice chunks. At my daughter's school, we, as the parent outdoor committee, we were able to buy the school some ice chippers, because it's especially this time of after a warm spell, you get that ice. And so the ice chipper will allow the children to make some ice chunks to then play with. And so ice chunks are fabulous you can see these children up here, sorted them into bigger and smaller. You can build with them. They can be special gems that become very coveted. More fun in winter. Milk crates are really great at any time of the year. They're light enough that younger children can also really move them around. You can sit in them, you can stack them. In this case, they're filling them with snow and making snow blocks. This is a little hill constructed with loose parts. This is at the daycare just down the street from me. They don't have a hill there, it's very flat. But this was just big enough for younger children to they would line up with crazy carpets to go down this thing. So it's a small pallet with some wood, with some milk crates to prop it up. And they poured ice down there and poured water and froze it. And it was just enough to really provide the young children with that sense of speed and a slide in a very different way in their very flat childcare setting. Different things to use on ice. So having a small patch of ice, we need to learn how to move on ice. If we don't, when we're older, we fall and hurt ourselves. So children need to learn how their body moves on ice. And so putting out milk crates, plastic boxes, cardboard boxes on ice is really a fun way for them to move their body around on ice. And this came up at the kitchen stuff as well, but bringing out the kitchen stuff in the winter, using colored ice. We just did a week of colored ice. And the children, some of them, they shatter them to smaller chunks, and they have small little shards of colored ice. They become jewels. You can do all sorts of great things with colored ice in the winter. And these are just two really, this one childcare center just has done some really neat things. They took 2 pallets on the left-hand side here. So simple. And all they did was put $2 door hinges on there. And so now these 2 pallets put together has made a little cozy corner. You put a blanket over that and you have a really neat little fort. You put it up like this and you have another way to use it. And so again, using really simple materials that really can extend the play. And on the right-hand side, someone had an old headboard and they found some old, stands of some kind. And this looks really simple, but the children can hide behind it. It could be a stage. It could be somewhere to run around. And again, it was basically free. So really unique ways that using loose parts in different ways can really enhance play. All right, that was there's so many options with loose parts. Ken has mentioned inner tubes. If you have any great loose parts you have used or that you use every day, throw them in the chat and let us know so we can learn from the people that are here. And if you haven't used loose parts before, let us know where you might start. What might you be able to bring into your play space or bring out with the children that you work with? Anyone have any? So snowballs, snow chunks? Yes. Yeah, Shannon, adding the freezing water balloons are great. They're dinosaur eggs or all sorts of fun things. Tin cans. Nice. Nice. Pool noodles. Yeah, those are fun too. Just bring a container. Yeah. And so how do we get loose parts? There's all sorts of different ways. If you really get into them, you become a bit of I don't know, crazy person. You notice, you start seeing loose parts everywhere. When I walk my dog, I was walking down the alley and someone had some old tires. I'm like, oh, I need to go knock on their door. But again, Kijiji, but even asking the way to start is to ask families, because do they have any old sheets or old kitchen stuff that they're not using that they want to donate? And you do have to be careful, because then you might end up with too much. But being very clear on sort of what kind of things you're looking for would be easy to start a collection of loose parts that you can use outdoors. So Lacey's asking, would I show the kids the different ways everything can be used first, or would I let them explore? Yeah, just let them go. Because the kids come up with things that I would never think of, ever. They are just, yeah, their brains are so different than ours. Again, when I see a stick, I see like maybe a magic wand and a sword. But today, the kids were using them as hot dogs. So yeah. Dishwashing buckets from the dollar store. Oh yeah. Use them for pond dipping in the summer and snow cultures and forts in the winter. Yeah. I had one teacher that she froze a bunch of colored ice, and even her grade, she was quite surprised that at recess she put out all the colored ice, and even the grade 5s, who are really usually, she said, really too cool to do any of this stuff, really got into it. They were building and doing all sorts of things. Cool, thank you. Yeah, Luce, there's some really great resources, and I don't know if I shared all of them in my in the handout, but there's some really great examples of schools using loose parts, how we can use them at recess. It's starting to become more popular, I suppose. There are some challenges like storage and sort of logistical issues around it, but there are schools that have started to figure it out. I'm just going to go through a couple of things that I find really useful when I'm thinking about working with children outside. So David Sobel, if you haven't read his things, I would recommend it. He's been around for a long time. So he's come up with design principles. And so what he did is he watched children play, child-led play outdoors, and he came up with 7 different ways he saw them play over and over again. And these are all backed up by what other people have seen too in play. But his idea was that if we need to create, if you work in a school and you have curriculum you need to do, how can we design activities with children that really build on how they naturally play outside? And so I'll just touch briefly on 4 of them, and I won't go through all 7 of them, but I have a link to all 7 design principles in the resource. I just think they're kind of a different take on looking on what to do with children outside. The idea of adventure. Children love adventures. We often say we're going on a walk. That's very boring. Or going on a hike. But if you frame it as an adventure and you actually have an opportunity to go off the path, go off the trail, you never know what you may find. So on the left, for in 2019, I did a week called Get Outside and Play Week, and we had a hill rolling challenge. And so all we were doing was rolling down the hills, and every time the children went down the hill, they got a sticker as a way to have a different type of adventure. This picture on the right was during a lockdown where we couldn't, anyway, we live close to lots of natural areas where I am. And so my daughter and I, we just stepped off the path and went through the forest, and we found a chair in a tree. You never know what you're going to find. So that idea of sense of adventure when we go outside can really change how children engage with the natural world. Another principle that David Sobel talks about is animal allies. And I really, really love this. And if you work with young children, you see this all the time. The way that they develop a relationship with the plants and the animals is that they become the plants and the animals. So in this example, we read a book about wolves. And in the play space, we put these very rudimentary laminated wolf masks. And these children played wolf for 3 hours. There was howling and there was packs and there was all sorts of things, but they became wolves. And did they get the ecology and biology of the wolf correct? Most likely not. But they have this deeper connection with the wolf because they were allowed to become wolves. For birds, we can build nests and build wings, and they can fly around the play space. They don't need to know the name of the bird, they need to become the birds. And so this is an important early learning concept, is that idea of animal allies. Small worlds are really, really useful. And we know like small worlds are, children play small worlds all the time. So when you think of Hot Wheels cars or a dollhouse, those, or Thomas the Train, that's all taking the big world and bringing it down into a scale that children can manipulate and learn more about. And so this, using the concept of small worlds is really valuable outside, especially if you have a small space. And so children can still get into imaginative play, but at perhaps a different scale. And so this is, they get a string and they're asked to gather loose parts and build a playground for an ant, or a play space for a ladybug. And so it just gets them thinking at a different scale. So small worlds are, again, a natural way that children engage outdoors. And there's lots of ways that we can support that. This whole trend of fairy gardens just builds on that idea of small worlds. That's why we love it, because it's tiny and adorable. So it was interesting though, we read a book about fairies, and we didn't do any of the fancy fairy home stuff. We just went for a little walk, and every single little hole that the children found was a fairy hole. And so we didn't need to do the fancy stuff. We just sparked their curiosity and they found the magic. So that idea of fairies and other magical forest creatures builds on that idea of small worlds. And why not bring the plastic dinosaurs outside? We play with them inside, bring them out. So we built snow volcanoes and had the dinosaurs out there, and it just sort of changes the way children play with a toy when you bring it outside. So the adventures that these dinosaurs could go on were so different when they could go outside. And so that's another thing to consider. What are the small worlds that they engage in inside, and how can you bring that maybe outside? Oh, Sean, every mushroom is a fairy home here. True. So yeah, small worlds is a great one. And the last one I'll mention that David Sobel talks about is hunting and gathering. It's a natural way that humans engage with the natural world. And it doesn't have to be what we might think of as hunting and gathering. It can be. We can teach children to what plants that they can eat, how to use a knife, make a fire. That's all part of this. Also part of this is a scavenger hunt that builds on children's natural instinct to hunt and gather. They love scavenger hunts or looking for colors. There's all sorts of different ways to build on sort of that natural hunting and gathering instinct with children. Even just making, we had one group, they made so many bows and arrows, and they didn't actually work that well, but they made them and they carried them around, and that's also building on that idea. Oh, I just had that picture. All right. So what are the 3 ice balls in the picture? So Bixie, those are, you just take balloons, fill them with water, put a couple of drops of food coloring, and you freeze the water in the balloon, and you get these really great round ice balls. So those are always great fun. Yeah, and they last quite a long time, longer than ice cubes, so they're good to have. And you are other things to freeze. So one teacher I talked to she'd taken cookie sheets and had frozen them, so it created these sort of long, thin things, or sort of those thick lasagna pans, freezing ice that way. So even just asking the families that you work with, everyone freeze water in something and bring it. And I mean, this one teacher got people who froze 5-gallon pails. So they had these big chunks of ice that the children used to sit on and make a car. And then someone had frozen water in pie plates, and that made the steering wheel. So just freezing ice in different shapes opens up all sorts of opportunities. All right, so we have a couple of minutes for some questions or comments or anything that you would like to share. Ooh, that's, yeah, nice idea, Ken. You can decorate you can put little lights in your ice balls and decorate your own yard. So I'll give you a couple minutes to see if you have any questions or comments that you would like to add. I'd love to hear, do you have any big challenges for getting children outside that we could discuss? Because most likely you're not the only one with that challenge. No questions at all. Oh, I think you're on mute, Shannon. Oh, so Lacey, are there any safety guidelines you have the kids follow? Safety is quite high priority at our school. Yeah, so I mean, there's different approaches to this idea of safety guidelines. The program that I work with, we have very few rules. We have guidelines like you have to be able to see an adult and be kind to yourself, be kind to nature. Because I think if we give children too many rules, I mean, they just forget them anyway. So I think if this is important at your school, you need to make sure that sort of your administration is on board with what you're doing and what's being talked about, and how you're talking about it. There's a really great, I don't know if there's a really great video from, and maybe you shouldn't show your admin this, I don't know, but it was just Google No Rule School New Zealand. And there's a school, and we can't compare ourselves to New Zealand. Their insurance situation is very different than ours. We can't really compare ourselves. But what they did is the principal, they decided to have no rules in the playground, and they didn't say from now on, children, there shall be no rules. They just sort of stopped saying no to stuff. And conflict went down in the playground. Children were allowed to rough and tumble play. So conflict went down, focus in the classroom went up. They had these really great side effects of really sort of reducing the number of rules that they had in their recess. Anyway, it's a really interesting sort of story to follow, but yeah, you need to make sure that you're following your school board rules or your child, whatever organization you work for. you need to ensure that you're following their rules. Big C, one challenge I have is that some students may not be appropriately dressed for the weather due to different reasons, including access to resources. Yeah, that's a big one. One of the best ways around it is to have a lending library. And even during COVID, it's possible, people are doing it. But making sure, like I know at my daughter's school, anything that's not claimed at the end of the year in the lost and found gets moved to our bin of stuff that children can borrow. And so, I mean, there's logistical challenges around some of that, but if that's the barrier to getting outside, there are ways over that barrier. So yeah, asking parents to, some parents might have the ability to donate their kids' old snowshoes or whatever that is, so you can have sort of a stockpile. Because I mean, if one child doesn't bring their gloves, or they don't have access to good gloves, then that means you can't take everyone outside. And so there are ways that we need to get around the clothing aspect. Lindsay, any suggestions on how to get buy-in from other team members who don't see the value of loose parts or recycled items? Yeah. Is this in a school or childcare setting? What's your setting, Lindsay? Childcare? Well, they should be all over that. They take courses on play, and like loose parts are all in. I just don't, you know, most of the program, like most of the people I've worked with, that's the basis of our program. So I've never really had to convince anyone I work with it, this is a good idea.
I have just some people that are interested in the shiny new, let's spend money mentality instead. I know, and it's really, it's been challenging to really demonstrate why the children love it so much. So I was just wondering if you had.
Do you do pedagogical documentation in your program at all? Like,
oh yeah, and like we have a lot of educators that do the loose parts stuff, but then there's the odd one that whole loose parts, or and I mean, I'm going to do it anyway, and we're going to do it anyway, but when it's someone who's on with us for management, even who doesn't who sees it as cluster or clutter, and it's so yeah, so it's hard to change their mind when that's what they see.
Yeah, I mean, showing, if you can, I mean, there's so much support for this, but I mean, using some tools you might have already, like actually make an effort to document and to do pedagogical documentation around how the children are using loose parts, and making those direct connections for them about how they're using this and how that supports their creativity or whatever is important to that person. You got to find out what's important to them and like tailor your comments to what's important to them, because it might be completely different than what's important to you. I know working with some like schools and parents, some parents really have a strong focus on academics. So we need to connect loose parts and outdoor play with the academic side. This is how we're learning our numbers and letters outside. And this is the creativity and innovation that your children develop when they go outside. So yeah, you need to, I don't know, get to know them better, find out how they tick. Yeah, there's no great answer to that. Just keep doing what you are doing. Yeah, that's a good one, Leah. Invite others to watch and participate. One of our board members have a great story about inviting the principal to a grade 8 camping trip, and after that, not having any issues with resistance. Excellent, Leah. Oh. Yeah. All right, it is 7:20, and we said we would take an hour and a quarter. So thank you so much for your time today. I hope you come away with at least one new idea. If you want to contact me, here's my email, and then there's my website there. And I love talking about this and sharing resource on this. So if you're looking for something in particular, please do reach out, and I would love to connect.